She stood in the middle of the dining room, deep indigo cotton dress, heavy woven, white apron tied at the waist, hair parted in the middle, tucked beneath the white cap that made no exceptions, not even for the July heat in Pittsburgh. Flat leather shoes, still carrying a smear of dirt on the left side, from the garden, from when she'd woken at 5 that morning and picked tomatoes before catching the bus. Around her. Crystal chandeliers worth more than she'd earn in 2 years, tables draped in Italian linen, wine glasses with curves calculated by an engineer, and 46 pairs of eyes, waiters, sommeliers, patrons with 6-figure watches, all turned toward the man who had just said something in Arabic. Something that made his 2 assistants take a step back. Something that made the maître d' close his eyes for half a second, like someone deciding he hadn't heard it. The man, Khalid al-Rashidi, 62, $4 billion in oil and real estate, a grey suit that cost more than the restaurant's annual rent, looked at her the way one looks at furniture that's out of place. He repeated the sentence, slower, enunciating each syllable as if speaking to someone who didn't understand her own language. The 2 assistants didn't move. The maître d' looked away. No one did anything. Sarah Miller, 25 years old, daughter of Jonas Miller of the Kishakokilas Valley community, took 3 seconds, not to think about what to say, to decide whether it was worth saying. And then she opened her mouth and answered in Arabic. Not the hesitant Arabic of someone who'd studied by app. Not the tourist Arabic of memorized phrases. The Arabic of Cairo, of Lebanon, of the Gulf. Regional nuance intact. The formal vocabulary of someone who'd spent years reading academic texts in the language, with a precision that made Khalid's younger assistant let out an involuntary sound, somewhere between a laugh and a gasp. Khalid al-Rashidi's mouth fell half open, and for perhaps the first time in decades, he found no words. 2 hours earlier, she had been nothing to him. The furniture out of place, the wrong note, the incongruent figure who didn't belong in that room. 2 hours earlier, she had arrived at the most expensive restaurant in Pittsburgh, carrying a ceramic dish of hot food and a folded note in her apron pocket. She had come in through the service entrance as always. She had greeted the kitchen staff by name as always. What wasn't always? The man at table 12, what he said, and what she did next. Sarah Miller woke at 4:52 that morning. Not to an alarm. She'd never owned one. She woke because the body knows when you've lived this way long enough, when the darkness starts losing the texture of deep night and takes on that different quality, thinner, that announces dawn before it actually arrives. She lay still for exactly 2 minutes. It was a habit she could never quite explain to anyone who asked. That pause between sleep and the day. That quiet inventory before beginning. What needs doing? What can wait? Where the weight sits today. The weight, that morning, sat in the craft paper envelope on the kitchen table. She'd arrived the night before from Kishakokilas Valley. 12 hours on the bus, a transfer in Harrisburg, the last leg by taxi because the bus didn't reach the neighborhood where the room she rented, when she needed to stay in Pittsburgh, was located. The room was small, smelled faintly of mildew, and had a window facing an alley. She had slept well. The envelope was from her younger brother, sent from Kishakokilas Valley. She opened it carefully, folded the paper, read it once, tucked it into her coat pocket. Then she went to the kitchen, lit the stove, a gesture that still comforted her. The strike of the match, the blue flame rising, and began preparing what she'd promised to bring Dominic, the morning shift sous chef, whose mother was sick and who couldn't get away long enough for a real lunch. The dish was dark ceramic, the kind Sarah's grandmother still used for preserves. She'd brought it from the community on her last visit. It held heat for hours. While she cooked, she didn't turn on a television. There wasn't one in the room. She didn't check her phone. There was one, a prepaid model she used for work, but not the kind of thing she checked compulsively. She stood in silence, stirring the wooden spoon in the pot, watching the alley outside slowly gain light. There was a pigeon on the sill of the window across the way. Sarah watched it for a while. "Do you belong here? Or did you just end up lost?" she thought, not quite sure whether she was asking the bird or herself. Sarah Miller had left the Kishakoquias Valley community in central Pennsylvania at 18. She hadn't been cast out. It wasn't Meidung, that word carrying so much weight, the formal exclusion, the family's silence as punishment. It was more complicated than that, and it's always more complicated than the word suggests. She had asked to go. She had told her father, Jonas Miller, a man of few words and broad shoulders that smelled of sawdust, even in his Sunday clothes. "I need to see what's out there, Pa. I can't not go." Jonas had been quiet for a long time. Then he'd said, "You come back when you need to." It wasn't permission. It wasn't a blessing. It was the only way he had of saying he loved her without the word costing him the world. She had gone. Over the following 7 years, Sarah Miller had done things the community wouldn't easily have had a vocabulary for. She had studied, a merit scholarship, night work, nights with her face over books, until she could no longer make out the letters. She had learned languages because she discovered she had a talent for it that was almost physical, like some people's capacity for carrying weight or others for seeing in the dark. Languages entered her differently, as if there were already a space waiting for them. English, of course. She'd always known it, grown up speaking it. Pennsylvania Dutch from the community. Standard German. Then Spanish, because there were co-workers who spoke it, and she wanted to understand what they said about a sick son. Then Arabic, because a professor at the university offered Friday morning classes, and she had nothing better to do with that morning, and Arabic captured her in a way she hadn't expected. The calligraphy running the opposite direction, the music of the consonants, the roots that unfolded into whole families of meaning from 3 letters. She'd reached fluency in modern standard Arabic within 2 years, in Cairene dialect within another 6 months. She'd written an academic paper, the only one in her entire fragmented self-taught education, assembled in pieces between work shifts, on Pennsylvania Dutch interference in Arabic acquisition among bilingual speakers. The paper had been published. A small journal, but published. She'd kept the printed copy tucked inside a Bible her grandmother had given her when she left. No one in the community knew about any of it, and here she was, 25 years old, indigo dress, white apron, cotton cap, carrying a ceramic dish down the service corridor of the most expensive restaurant in Pittsburgh because she needed money to get through the month while she dealt with what was inside the craft paper envelope. What was in the envelope was simple to read, harder to carry. Jonas Miller's farm, on the southern edge of Kishakoquias Valley, had been appraised by a surveyor sent by the county. The report stated that the property's main structure, the barn, the silo, the house, showed irregularities in the land record dating back to 1987, when Sarah's grandfather had acquired part of the lot from a neighbor in a transaction that, according to the surveyor, hadn't been properly filed with the county recorder. The document's language was technical and cold as well water in February. What she understood was this: someone wanted that land. Someone had hired a lawyer, who had hired a surveyor, who had found a 37-year-old paperwork gap to use as leverage. And her father, Jonas Miller, who knew nothing of recorders, who paid his bills in cash, and never signed anything that hadn't been read 3 times over by a community elder, had no way to answer that alone. Sarah had received the envelope through her younger brother, who'd sent it by letter. Paper letter, because that's how the community communicates with those outside it. Her brother had written in the small, even hand she'd recognized since childhood, "Pa won't ask, but the farm might be lost by month's end. If you can come." She had left Kishakokilis the following morning, tucked the envelope in her pocket, and went to work. Dominic was at the kitchen entrance when she arrived, chef's cap in hand, dark circles down to his chin. "You didn't have to bring food, Sarah." "I know I didn't have to." She handed him the dish. He lifted the lid, breathed it in, closed his eyes for a second, with an expression that wasn't hunger. Something deeper than that. "My mother used to make something like this," he said. "Don't know what it is, but she made it. It's chicken broth with herbs. The main one's called Bonenkraut in Pennsylvania Dutch. I don't know the English word. Does it have an English word?" "Everything has an English word. I just don't know that one." He laughed. So did she. A short laugh, rare, the kind that escapes before you decide whether to let it. Then she went to change her apron and start her shift. The restaurant was called Ardent, the kind of place that didn't need a big sign out front because the people who were meant to know it existed already knew, and the ones who didn't weren't the clientele. 42 seats, a 3-week waiting list, a menu that changed weekly depending on what the chef could get from local producers. Sarah had gotten the waitressing job because the owner, Marianne Holtz, had a curious principle. She didn't hire on restaurant history. She hired on how a person behaved when things went wrong. Sarah's interview had included a hypothetical scenario. A glass of wine spilled on a VIP guest during his engagement dinner. Sarah had described exactly what she'd do, step by step, with a calm precision Marianne had recognized as the kind of competence you can't teach. You either have it or you don't. "And the dress?" Marianne had asked, looking at her plainly. "You plan on working in that?" "Yes." Sarah hadn't hesitated. "It's how I dress. If that's a problem, I understand." Marianne had studied her for a few seconds. "It's not a problem," she said. "But the customers will ask." Customers ask about everything. It's their job to be curious, and mine to be useful. Marianne had hired her on the spot. What Sarah had never told Marianne, what she'd never told anyone at that restaurant, was this. She'd spent 2 years at a university in Ohio, studying linguistics and Arabic, before she had to stop for lack of money. She'd spent 2 more years working for translation companies to save up enough to go back. She had gone back, finished what credits she could, then stopped again when her father first fell ill. Her education was fragmented, uneven, non-linear, the kind that doesn't fit on a resume, that has no clear line from start to finish. But the knowledge was there, intact, laid down in layers like sediment. She didn't talk about it. Not out of false modesty, not to build suspense, but because, in the community, she'd learned a truth the outside world still hadn't managed to unlearn in her. What you know is for doing, not for announcing, not for establishing rank. Knowledge that needs to be proclaimed to have value is knowledge unsure of itself. Sarah Miller knew fluent Arabic. She knew it because she'd used it, been useful with it. She'd translated documents for a clinic serving immigrants. She'd helped a Syrian family understand their apartment lease. She'd read letters aloud to an elderly woman who could no longer see well. What she knew served the people around her. Announcing that she knew it before it served someone would have struck her as the strangest, most pointless thing in the world. The shift started at 11:30. At 12:15, table 12 was seated. Khalid al-Rashidi walked into Ardent the way someone walks into a place that already belongs to him before he's paid for anything. It wasn't performed arrogance. It was something older, more embodied. It was the posture of someone who'd grown up knowing that spaces adjust to him, not the other way around. 2 assistants behind him, the kind who carry folders and don't smile. A lawyer beside him, the kind who wears thin glasses and turns everything into a negotiation. The maitre d' led him to table 12, the best in the room, window onto the street, set apart enough to guarantee privacy. Sarah had section B, which included table 12. She approached with the steady calm of someone who'd done this 1,000 times, notepad in her apron, pen behind her ear. "Good afternoon. May I offer the water and aperitif list?" Khalid didn't look at her. He spoke to the younger assistant in Arabic, fast, colloquial, Gulf dialect, with the speed of someone who knows he isn't understood and uses that as convenience. What he said was roughly this: "Why do these small-town places always put this kind of person to serve? It looks fifth-rate." The younger assistant glanced at the table. The older one stayed impassive. Sarah wrote something in her notepad. "Shall I start you with sparkling or still water?" she asked in English, in the same tone as always. Khalid looked at her for the first time. She saw what he saw: the plain indigo cotton dress, the white apron with a small stain of something he'd probably take for grease or dirt, the cap concealing her hair completely, the flat leather shoes, the absence of any makeup, any jewelry, any of the visual markers he used to calibrate the importance of the people around him. "Still," he said in English, his Gulf accent clearly audible. Then he turned to the assistant and said something further in Arabic, quieter now, which Sarah caught in full anyway. "And don't let them send this one back. Get someone who actually knows what she's doing." She noted the water order. "Right away." She stepped away. In the kitchen, Dominic saw her pass and noticed something in the way she walked. Not different exactly, but compressed. Like when someone holds something large inside a small space, and the pressure doesn't show on the surface but is there, present, moving the air around it. "Everything all right at 12? "For now," she said and grabbed the water bottle. The lunch went on. Khalid ordered for the whole table without much consultation of the menu. He knew what he wanted, or acted like he did, which for practical purposes was the same thing. The lawyer ordered the fish. The assistants ordered what the boss ordered, half a beat later. Sarah served everything with her usual precision. Correct angle, setting the plate down. Correct distance. No unnecessary noise. Each time she came near, Khalid spoke to his assistants in Arabic. Sometimes it was business instructions. Sometimes comments about the restaurant. Once it was about her, something she hadn't expected to hear with quite that bluntness, even having calibrated her expectations. He told the younger assistant there was a curious irony in a woman who looked like she'd stepped out of an 1800s painting, serving in a restaurant that charged $200 a head, and that it said something about the American interior he still hadn't decided was quaint or simply sad. The younger assistant didn't respond. Sarah set the bread basket down and moved away. By 2 in the afternoon, the room had thinned out. Khalid ordered dessert, a single item, vanilla ice cream with honey and walnuts, which she noted without comment. When she went to fetch it, the pastry chef's hands were full and asked her to wait 2 minutes. She stood at the kitchen entrance. Dominic was wiping down the counter nearby. "The guy at 12, he said low. "Is he who I think he is?" "Depends who you think he is." "Al-Rashidi, oil. Bought 3 towers downtown last year." "Could be. Did you know?" She didn't answer. She picked up the ice cream when it was ready and went back to the floor. She set the dessert down. Khalid was on the phone in Arabic, visibly irritated with whoever was on the other end. The younger assistant was taking notes. The lawyer was reviewing documents. Sarah stepped back to her waiting position in the section. 2 minutes later, Khalid ended the call. He looked at the younger assistant and said, in Arabic, but now at a volume that was no longer meant to be discreet, "I need you to handle the Kishakoquilas matter before Friday. The paperwork is in order. The community has no way to contest it. Have the lawyer confirm with the recorder's office." Sarah stopped. Not visibly. She was standing with her back to them, 6 feet away, her face neutral for any camera that might be filming. But she stopped. Kishakokias. It was a small name for a small valley in central Pennsylvania that few people had reason to mention. Not Pittsburgh, not Harrisburg, the kind of name you only knew if you lived there, or had business there, or were buying land there. She stood still for 3 seconds, then went to check on table 15, which had asked for more wine. At 2:20, she went back to table 12 to present the check. Khalid was finishing his ice cream. The lawyer had the folder open on the table, documents she couldn't read from the angle she stood at, but she recognized the general shape. The kind of paper with a recorder's office letterhead, with seals, with signatures in specific places. She set the check folio on the table beside it. Khalid opened it, glanced at the numbers, looked at her for the second time all afternoon. "You speak Arabic?" The question came out in English, direct, in the tone of someone who asks already knowing the answer and only wants it confirmed. "Why do you ask?" "Because you stopped when I was speaking. Twice." She looked at him, didn't look away. "I can process payment whenever you're ready." Khalid set his napkin on the table. There was something different in the way he looked at her now. No longer the look of furniture out of place, but the look of someone recalibrating. He was deciding whether he'd heard what he thought he'd heard in her silence. "I'm asking a simple question," he said, still in English, but a little louder now. The lawyer closed the folder. "Do you speak Arabic or not?" 4 nearby tables had noticed. The Section A server, Priya, stopped what she was doing and watched from a distance. The maitre d', Sebastien, 40, French, with the kind of professional discretion that was its own art form, had sensed something in the air and was approaching along the edge of the room at a measured pace. Then Khalid did what he shouldn't have. He looked at his assistants, said something in Arabic. Loud this time, no disguise at all, projected for the room. And what he said was, roughly translated, "These small-town people don't even understand their own language. Imagine ours." It was the younger assistant who reacted first. Not verbally. He just looked at Sarah in a way that was half discomfort, half a kind of warning she hadn't asked for. Sarah stayed where she was. Sebastian got close enough to hear. Priya had stopped entirely. A couple at the next table, she noticed from the corner of her eye, had set down their forks. They were listening. Sarah looked at Khalid. He looked back at her with that particular expression of a man waiting for the world to confirm what he'd already decided about it. And then she said, in Arabic, in the Gulf dialect she'd learned precisely because it was the most common one in the texts she'd worked with. "I've understood Arabic since I was 20. I've understood you since you sat down at this table. And I understood what you just said about Keisha Kokilas." The silence that followed lasted maybe 4 seconds. It felt much longer. Khalid al-Rashidi wasn't silent because he was speechless. He was silent because he was recalculating. It was visible. It was that recalibration that happens when someone realizes the map they'd been using doesn't match the territory. He looked at her, looked at his assistants, looked back. "You're," he started in English. "A waitress," she said in English, with the same calm as always, because that's what they were in that space. "A waitress. I can process the payment now." Sebastian had arrived. "Everything all right here?" he asked, with the professional Frenchness that made the question courtesy and warning at once. "Perfect," said Khalid, but there was something different in his voice now. "Perfect," said Sarah in the exact same tone. The lawyer looked at the closed folder on the table. It was the detail she'd noticed since first approaching table 12 that afternoon. There was a logo in the corner of the folder. Discreet, silver grey on a dark background. A Pittsburgh firm she'd looked up 3 weeks earlier, when the craft paper envelope had arrived, and she'd started piecing together who was trying to take her father's land. The same firm. She said nothing. She ran Khalid's card through the handheld terminal, printed the receipt, tucked it into the leather folio on the table. "Thank you for dining at Ardent," she said. "Enjoy the rest of your day." Khalid was watching her with an expression she couldn't fully name. Not anger, not quite admiration, something more complicated. The look of a man who's spent his life being the most powerful person in any room and had just realized he was sitting in one where another variable existed. She stepped away. She went straight to the staff bathroom. Stood 2 minutes in front of the mirror doing nothing in particular. Washed her hands. Looked at her own hands. Calloused palms. The kind of callus that comes from real work. Years of real work. Not from a gym. Hands that had milked cows and planted tomatoes and turned the pages of linguistics books until the edges wore soft. Kishakokilyas. He'd said the name like it was a coordinate on a business map, like a line in a report. Like everything in that valley, the houses, the families, the land the Millers had worked for 3 generations, was a variable in an equation she hadn't been invited to weigh in on. She dried her hands on the paper towel, left the bathroom. The shift would end in 2 hours. But she knew she wasn't waiting for the shift to end. She was waiting for something else. That sensation of when a decision has already been made internally and the body is just waiting for the moment to carry it out. Sebastian was at the kitchen entrance when she passed. "The gentleman at 12 asked about you," and he said, neutral tone, professional, but there was something underneath it. The discreet curiosity of someone who'd heard enough to know there was more story here than showed on the surface. "What did he ask?" "Who you were. How long you'd worked here." "What did you tell him?" "That you were an exemplary employee." A pause. "Which isn't a lie." "It isn't." "Sarah." He waited until she looked at him. "The Arabic you spoke. It was good. It was adequate. It was a lot more than adequate." Another pause. "You don't have to tell me anything, but if you need anything, I need 20 more minutes on shift," she said, "and then I'm going to need to leave early, if that's possible." He agreed without asking why. At 3:10, Khalid al-Rashidi was still at table 12. The lawyer had stepped out. For a call, apparently. The assistants were on their phones. Khalid was drinking the coffee he'd ordered after dessert, with the look of someone still physically present, but whose mind had already gone elsewhere. Sarah approached. "More coffee?" He looked at her. "Sit down," he said, in Arabic. She stayed standing. "I can't sit during my shift." "Then stand." A pause. "Where did you learn?" "Arabic?" "Arabic, with that fluency, that vocabulary. You used a word for documentation that most native speakers wouldn't use in casual conversation." "I read a lot. That doesn't explain it." She stayed quiet for a moment. "I had a teacher who used to say Arabic goes in through the ear, or it doesn't go in at all. So I listened a lot too." Khalid watched her with that particular attention she hadn't seen from him before. Not the look of furniture out of place, not the recalculation, but something closer to genuine. "Kishakokilyas," he said. "Yes." "You heard?" "I heard." A pause. "You're from there." She didn't answer, but she didn't look away either. Khalid set his coffee cup down with a deliberate motion. There was something in the way he did it. Not the carelessness from before, not the indifference of someone who doesn't notice what's around him. It was a more considered gesture. "I didn't know," he said. "That I spoke Arabic? That there were people like this there?" Sarah considered that for a moment. "There always were," she said. "You just hadn't looked." At 3:22, the lawyer returned from his call. He saw Sarah standing near the table, saw Khalid looking at her in a way that wasn't what it had been. He frowned slightly. The kind of professional frown that isn't expression, it's calculation. Khalid, he said, we need to confirm the dispatch for Keisha Kokilas by 4. Khalid didn't take his eyes off Sarah. Wait. We can't wait. The recorder's office closes. I said wait. The lawyer went quiet. Sarah hadn't moved. Khalid then did something she hadn't expected. He opened the folder that had stayed on the table and slid it gently toward her. Do you know what this is? She looked at the documents. They were exactly what she'd imagined. The surveyor's report, the irregularity notice, the request for land record review. And underneath, she noticed with a clarity that felt almost physical, the name of the proposed buyer. An LLC whose name said nothing, but whose registered address occupied the same floor as Khalid al-Rashidi's office in downtown Pittsburgh. Yes, she said. I know what this is. Khalid said nothing for a long moment. Then, you have someone there? My father, and the community around him. Silence. The lawyer had visibly stopped breathing. The paperwork is in order, the lawyer said to Khalid, not to her. It's a legitimate process. There is a registration irregularity. The 1987 registration irregularity, Sarah said in English slowly, like someone taking a folded garment out of a closet, was corrected in 1991 by an administrative amendment filed by Mifflin County's own recorder's office, and the correction document is on file in the property records under number 914478 MC. If your surveyor didn't find it, it's because he didn't look, or because he wasn't asked to. The lawyer's mouth fell open. The younger assistant looked at the table. Khalid al-Rashidi went still for a full 4 seconds. Then he closed the folder. What happened over the next 20 minutes wasn't dramatic in the way film tends to imagine that kind of thing. No speech. No moment where she stood on the table and proclaimed the truth to the room. Ardent had 42 seats, and at that moment, roughly 20 people were still present, and none of them heard most of what was said at table 12 during that stretch. What they did see was this. The server in the indigo dress had sat down. Sebastian had allowed it, with a discreet gesture when she glanced his way, in the chair left empty by the lawyer's temporary absence. And she had spoken, for 20 minutes, with that unhurried precision that doesn't ask permission. File number 914478MC was real. She had memorized it 3 weeks earlier, when she'd gone in person to the Mifflin County Recorder's office and spent an entire afternoon combing through paper records, because they were still on paper there, that county not having digitized everything, until she found the administrative amendment she knew had to exist. Her grandfather hadn't been a careless man. If he'd bought that piece of land, he'd done it properly. If there was an irregularity in the record, there was a correction somewhere. She had found the correction, photographed it with the prepaid phone, sent it to the email address she used for important things, and kept the file number. Because when you grow up in a world where the written word carries weight, where a contract is a contract, where a promise made before the community means more than any paper, but where the recorder's paper is what the outside world recognizes, you learn to respect both, the word and the document. File number 914478MC can be verified today, she told Khalid, the lawyer now back at the table and listening with the particular attention of someone calculating consequences in real time. The Mifflin County Recorder's Office accepts phone verification for file documents. If your surveyor submitted his report without checking the amendment records, the report is incomplete. If the report is incomplete, the record review process is based on partial documentation. If it's based on partial documentation, any administrative challenge will take months, possibly more than a year. The lawyer had opened his laptop. He was typing. Khalid hadn't taken his eyes off her. You know property law? He asked, slowly. I know enough about Mifflin County property records to know that document exists. How? I went there and looked. Silence. "You're Jonas Miller's daughter," he said. Not a question. "Yes. And you came here from there this week to work at a restaurant." "I came because of the envelope my brother sent me, and I need to work because the trip doesn't pay for itself." The lawyer had stopped typing. He was staring at the screen with the expression of someone who's found what he was looking for and doesn't like what he found. "Khalid," he said carefully. "The document exists. It's in the state's digitized system." Khalid didn't answer right away. He kept looking at Sarah with an expression she still couldn't fully name. There was something in it now that went beyond recalibration. Something closer to a man being shown a mirror he hadn't asked for and deciding what to do with the reflection. "You didn't come here to find me," he said. "I didn't know you'd be here." "And if you had known?" She thought about that for a moment. "I'd have come through the same door, the kitchen, carrying the same dish, and worked the same shift." Khalid looked at her hands on the table, the calloused palms, the posture of someone who had carried heavy things and hadn't forgotten the weight, even when she wasn't carrying it anymore. "Why are you telling me all this now?" "Because you said Kisha Kokwilas out loud during my shift, and because the document that undoes your surveyor's report exists, and it's easier for you to know that today than to find out after months and money spent on a process that's going nowhere." A pause. "And because it's my father's farm." Priya had stopped serving table 13. Sebastian had gone still at the kitchen entrance, arms crossed, watching table 12 with the look of an experienced maitre d' who knows something important is happening in the room and that the best thing he can do is not interfere. The couple at the next table had given up pretending not to listen. Khalid's younger assistant was watching Sarah with an expression that was clearly, unambiguously, admiration. At 3:52, Khalid al-Rashidi picked up his phone, dialed a number, spoke in Arabic, not the careless, private Arabic from before, but the formal, business Arabic, the tone of someone giving an instruction that needs to be carried out. What he said was this: "Suspend the Kisha Kokwilas dispatch. I need the full documentation reviewed before any further movement. Yes, now." He hung up, looked at the lawyer. "Review everything, before any next step." The lawyer nodded with that tilt of the head that's less agreement than professional survival. Khalid looked back at Sarah. "How long does it take to verify the document at the recorder's office?" "If you call now, under an hour." "And if the document confirms what you said, then your surveyor's report is wrong, and my father's farm stays exactly where it's always been." At 4:20, Khalid's lawyer had called the Mifflin County Recorder's office, had waited, had confirmed. File number 914478 MC existed. The 1991 administrative amendment was real. The Miller's land record had technically been in order for 34 years. The surveyor's report had been drawn up without consulting the amendment records. The lawyer closed his laptop with a sound softer than the weight of what it held deserved. Khalid sat in silence. Sarah had gone back to work while they verified, served table 15, fetched the check for table 8, kept half her attention on section B, the only way to survive a lunch shift without dropping anything. When she came back to table 12, Khalid looked at her differently than he had at any point before. "The document is exactly what you said," he said. "I know." "How did you know it existed?" "Because my grandfather was a careful man, and because I went and looked." He was quiet for a moment. "You went to the recorder's office in person?" "Yes." "You searched through paper records?" "They hadn't digitized that period yet." "You memorized the file number?" She didn't answer. That wasn't a question. Khalid looked at the white cap, at the indigo cotton dress, at the hands resting at her sides in work position. He looked at all of it, with that particular attention of someone seeing something for the first time, even after looking at it several times already. "Who are you?" he asked, in English, with a sincerity that hadn't been there before. Sarah considered the question. "Sarah Miller," she said. "From Kishakoquillas Valley, Jonas's daughter. A server at Ardent for 3 weeks. And before that, many things. The Arabic, I learned it. Mifflin County property law. I needed to. Why?" She paused a moment. "Because no one else was going to learn it for me." Sebastian had reached the table, not to intervene, to exist there as a professional witness, with that presence of a maître d' that takes up no space but creates a kind of field of decorum around everything. "Everything all right, Sarah?" "All good." Khalid looked at Sebastian. "She's extraordinary," he said, with a naturalness that wasn't performed praise. It was the statement of a fact that had just become available to him. Sebastian said nothing, but he looked at Sarah with something that was clearly more than a professional assessment of an employee. Priya had stopped again. The couple at the next table were openly listening now, no pretense of discretion left. Sarah didn't move. "Is there anything else I can get for table 12? Khalid made a sound somewhere between a laugh and something graver. "You just saved months of unnecessary process," he said, "and a considerable amount of my money that would have gone toward a case I'd have lost. I'd say you've done more than enough already. It was the right thing to do. Most people wouldn't have said anything, would have heard the town's name and stayed quiet." She looked at him. Most people hadn't been to the Mifflin County Recorder's office. The younger assistant was watching her with the expression she'd noticed before, but now with no ambiguity at all. It was clean admiration, uncomplicated. He said something in Arabic, low, more to himself than to anyone else. She understood it. "I was never the smartest person in the room, but I think I just saw who is." She didn't react to the comment, but there was something, a minute shift in the muscles around her eyes, that someone standing very close might have recognized as the distant relative of a smile. At 4:45, table 12 sat empty. Khalid had left a tip, not the standard 20%, but the kind of amount that only made sense if what had happened over the last few hours was considered part of the service. Which, in a way, Sarah thought as she folded the bills, it had been. The lawyer had left with his laptop and documents, and the look of a man about to have a difficult conversation with his client about due diligence going forward. The younger assistant left last. At the door, he turned and said in Arabic to her, "You should be charging consulting fees, not tips." She'd answered, also in Arabic, "I'm already being paid fairly." He'd smiled, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him all afternoon, and left. Sebastian found her in the kitchen 20 minutes later. There was something in the way he approached. Not the arrival of a supervisor, not the arrival of a curious colleague, but the arrival of someone who'd witnessed something and needed to name it. "What was that?" he asked. "A lunch." "Sarah." She stopped folding napkins. "He was trying to buy my father's farm through a fake registration irregularity," she said simply. "The document that disproved the irregularity existed. I knew where it was. I told him." Sebastian was quiet for a considerable stretch. "You went to the recorder's office?" "Yes." "And memorized the file number?" "I memorize things when they matter." "You speak fluent Arabic?" "Yes." "And I didn't know any of this. It wasn't relevant to the job." He kept looking at her with an expression she'd seen before in people, the kind of internal rearrangement that happens when someone realizes the version of reality they'd been operating with was incomplete. "Marianne is going to want to know. You can tell her. She's going to want to do, I don't know, Something. You know how she is. I know. Sarah. He waited. Is your father's farm going to be all right? She thought about the craft paper envelope, the file number, the way Khalid had closed his phone after giving the order to suspend the dispatch. I think so. You think so? I'll call my father tonight. He'll talk to the elder who handles the community's paperwork. They'll verify it together. Then I'm going to the recorder's office myself tomorrow morning with a copy of the file to make sure everything's registered the right way. You're doing that tomorrow? Can I come in before the 11 o'clock shift? He closed his eyes for half a second. Yes, you can. Priya had waited for Sebastian to leave the kitchen before coming closer. She was a woman from Mumbai who'd come to the United States 6 years earlier and had learned in that time that certain conversations need a certain amount of space. That man was trying to take your family's land, she said, not a question. He was. And you stopped him. I gave him the information he needed to make a better decision. Priya studied her. You're the calmest person I've ever seen, she said. Sarah considered that. My grandmother used to say calm isn't the absence of feeling. It's knowing where to put the feeling so it does some good. Priya was quiet for a moment. Your grandmother was wise. She was Amish, Sarah said, as if that explained the wisdom, or at least part of it. At 6 that evening, Marianne Holtz arrived for the dinner shift. Sebastian told her in 3 sentences. Marianne went straight to the kitchen, where Sarah was finishing her section report. I need a minute, Marianne said. Sure. You speak Arabic? Yes. Fluently? Yes. And you went to the Mifflin County Recorder's office to find a paper file? Yes. And remembered the file number? 914478MC. Marianne was quiet for a stretch visibly longer than it takes to process information. It was the silence of someone making peace with having hired someone without fully understanding who she'd hired. Sarah, she said finally, who exactly are you? Sarah closed her report notebook. Jonas Miller's daughter, from Kishacoquilas Valley, a server here for 3 weeks. And tomorrow morning, I'm going to the recorder's office before my shift to make sure my father's farm is properly on record. Is that all? For now, that's what matters. Marianne nodded slowly. Tomorrow's shift starts at 11, she said. If you need until noon, that's fine. Thank you. Don't thank me. A pause. I should be the one thanking you. I just don't quite know what for yet. Sarah picked up her coat. For an excellent lunch, she said, and left. The Mifflin County Recorder's office opened at 8:30 in the morning. Sarah was there at 8:26. She waited on the sidewalk, craft paper folder in hand, the same one she'd carried since Kishacoquilas, the file number written on a slip of paper folded in half inside it, and looked up at the July sky over Pennsylvania. The kind of blue that has no specific name in any language, the blue that's only the blue of summer inland, when the heat hasn't yet arrived but the day has already decided it's going to be a big one. The recorder's office clerk, a woman in her 50s with pink-framed glasses and the kind of encyclopedic knowledge of her own archives that only comes from decades in the same place, recognized her from her previous visit. The Amish girl, she said without malice. It was a way of organizing memory. Yes, I'm back to get a certified copy of 914478MC and to confirm the main record is in order. The clerk went to fetch it. It took 42 minutes. The 1991 amendment records were still on paper. The digitization was behind. There were boxes in storage that hadn't been opened in a long while. The clerk came back with her hands dusted from the archive and an expression of professional satisfaction. Here it is. Everything in order. Amendment recorded, signed, county stamped. She opened the folder on the counter. The Miller property in Kishacoquiles Valley has been correctly recorded since 1991. Any report that says otherwise didn't consult this documentation. Sarah took 2 certified copies, paid in cash, tucked the documents into her folder. "Thank you," she said. "Trouble on the farm?" the clerk asked, with the legitimate curiosity of someone who'd handled land and family stories for decades. There was. Not anymore. The clerk nodded with that particular recorder's office wisdom, one of the most underrated forms of wisdom there is. The kind held by someone who knows the right documents, found in time, change lives without most people ever knowing it happened. "Good luck, hon." Sarah left at 10:12 that morning. She called her father from a payphone. Jonas Miller had no telephone at home. No one in the Kishacoquiles community did. It was both rule and preference. 2 things reinforcing each other until they were indistinguishable. But there was a payphone at the general store in the community's business strip, which everyone used when they needed to reach the outside world, and which the store's owner, a heavy-set kind man named Eli Yoder, answered with the patience of someone who'd spent 20 years as the go-between for conversations that didn't fit inside the community's boundary. Eli picked up on the second ring. "It's Sarah Miller. Can I speak to my father?" "Hold on a minute, dear. I'll send someone to fetch him." 5 minutes of silence. The payphone hissed with faint static. She stood in the booth with the folder under her arm and the July sun in Pittsburgh coming through the scratched glass. Then, "Sarah," her father's voice. She hadn't realized how much she'd missed it until she heard it again. It was the kind of voice that doesn't change. Deep, slow, with that light Pennsylvania Dutch accent woven through a lifetime of English. The specific texture of a man who says little but thinks a great deal. "Pa," she said, "I found the document." Silence. "Which document?" he asked. But by the way he asked it, she knew he already knew. "The 1991 administrative amendment, the corrected record. The farm's in order, Pa. Whatever they try to base on that surveyor's report won't hold." Longer silence. "You went to the recorder's office," he said. "I did. Alone." "Yes. And found what you needed." Grandpa was careful. I knew he'd done it right. Another silence. The kind Jonas Miller used when there was something that needed saying, and he was choosing how to say it. "You didn't need to come all the way to Pittsburgh for this," he said finally. "Could have sent someone." "No one else was going to go in my place, Pa. No." A pause. "No, they weren't." She could hear in the background the sounds of Eli's store, someone talking, a bell, the soft sound of footsteps on a wood floor. The sounds of Kishacoquiles Valley traveling by wire to Pittsburgh. "Is the farm going to be all right?" he asked. "It's going to be all right." "You're sure?" "I have the certified copies right here. I can send them on the next bus to Harrisburg." "You don't need to." "I know I don't need to." A pause. "But I'm going to anyway." Silence. Then Jonas Miller said something she hadn't expected. "Your mother would have been proud." Sarah's mother had died when she was 12. She existed in Sarah's memory more as a smell than an image. Lavender and fresh bread, and the particular sound of someone walking through a wooden house while everyone else still slept. She was quiet for a moment. "I know," she said. "You all right?" "I'm all right." "When are you coming home?" She looked up at the July sky through the payphone glass. "Saturday," she said. "I need to finish what I'm doing here. I'll be back Saturday. We'll have food waiting. I know." "Sarah." "Yes, Pa. Thank you." She closed her eyes for a second. "It was the right thing to do," she said. And it was. "Take care." She hung up. She stayed inside the phone booth a moment longer, folder in hand, doing nothing in particular, just existing in that space between one thing and the next. Then she left. The shift started at 11:15. She arrived at 10:57, changed her apron, greeted the kitchen, checked Section B's tables. Dominic was reheating the broth left over from the dish she'd brought. "You saved the farm," he said without preamble. "I found the right document." She picked up her notepad. "How's your mother?" He was quiet for a moment. "Better today. The doctor says she can go home Friday." "That's good." "Sarah?" He waited until she looked at him. "That broth was the most important thing that happened this week, after my mother. I want you to know that." She nodded. There was something in that, in the broth, in the ceramic dish, in the name of an herb she didn't know in English. That felt closer to the world she came from than anything else in Pittsburgh. The kind of care that doesn't announce itself. The gesture that serves before it explains what it is. "I'll bring more tomorrow," she said. He opened his mouth to say she didn't have to. She was already out on the floor. Ardent posted a short note on social media that week, the kind companies post when something worth naming happens, without going into detail. The note said only that the Ardent team had handled a difficult situation with professionalism and that it was proud of all its staff. No names were mentioned. Sarah hadn't asked for her name to be mentioned. Marianne had offered formal recognition, a promotion, a bonus. Sarah had turned it down with the same calm she'd turned down non-essentials her whole life. "What do you want then?" Marianne had asked. "To keep working through the end of the month, then see." "See what?" Sarah had thought of the craft paper envelope. The farm, her father saying her mother would have been proud. "See what's needed," she said. On Thursday afternoon, Khalid al-Rashidi's lawyer sent formal correspondence to a Mifflin County attorney's office, chosen on Eli Yoder's recommendation, from the general store, announcing the closure of the record review process and the formal withdrawal of any claim on the Miller property in Kishakokias Valley. The letter arrived at 3 in the afternoon. The Mifflin County attorney called Eli's store. Eli sent someone to fetch Jonas Miller. Jonas Miller was quiet after hearing the news. Then he asked the attorney to send a copy to his daughter in Pittsburgh. "Her name is Sarah Miller," he said. "Of course," the attorney said. "She's the one who gave me the file number that made all this possible." Jonas was quiet again for a long moment. "She's always done that," he said finally. "Finds what's needed, since she was small." On Saturday morning, Sarah caught the bus back to Kishakokias Valley. The trip took 11.5 hours, with a transfer in Harrisburg and the last stretch by taxi to the edge of the community. She slept part of the way and stayed awake part of the way, face turned to the window, the fields of Pennsylvania passing by at bus speed, a speed that lets you see things in more detail than from a car. The trees, the barns, the fence lines, the horses in the distance. There were 2 horses in a field near Harrisburg that she watched until they disappeared from view. The field her father had once ridden her out to on a horse when she was 6, one October morning, to see the pines covered in frost before the sun melted it. The memory didn't come as a complete picture. It came as a fragment. The horse's breath fogging in the cold air, her father's large hand over hers on the reins. The silence of the world before 6 in the morning, different from any other silence. She didn't sleep through that part of the trip. The bus reached Lewistown at 8:40 that night. The taxi dropped her on the main road, 300 yards from the farm gate. She walked the rest with the craft paper folder and her coat over her arm, because the night was warm and the air smelled of hay and the July earth that holds its heat late. There were stars. There were crickets. There was the sound of a horse's hooves on a gravel path. The specific sound of shoe on stone she'd learned to recognize before she'd learned to walk. It was so present in Kishakokias' world. It was her father. Jonas Miller had come to meet her with the brown mare named Rachel. because the community's children had named all the farm animals, and Jonas Miller had never seen a reason to change the names his children had given. He stopped the mare. She stopped on the path. They stood like that for a moment. Then he climbed down, slowly, with knees that weren't what they'd been 20 years ago, and stood on the gravel with the reins in hand. She went to him. He put an arm around her shoulders. She stood quiet under that arm for a stretch of time that had no useful measure. "The farm's all right," she said finally. "It is," he said. "The document was exactly where I thought it would be. It was. Grandpa did it right. Your grandfather always did things right." "I knew that." A pause. "Why didn't you say anything when the envelope arrived?" Jonas was quiet. "Because you had your own life to live," he said. "It wasn't right to interrupt it." "Pa." "Yes. I'm your daughter. This is my life." He didn't answer, but the pressure of his arm around her shoulders shifted slightly, grew firmer, the kind of firmness that doesn't need words. Then he let go and took up the reins again. "Come on. There's food been waiting since 6. Maria's warmed it up 3 times already." Maria was her sister-in-law, her younger brother's wife, who had learned to cook exactly the way Sarah's mother used to because someone needed to learn, and she had volunteered with the kind of quiet love the Miller family understood better than most words. Sarah walked beside the horse to the gate. The farm came into view as they walked, the barn first, then the silo, then the house, its windows glowing warm orange against the dark of the field. At the gate stood her 6-year-old niece, who shouldn't have been awake at that hour but was, bare feet on the gravel, hair loose because her cap had slipped off somewhere in the waiting. "Aunt Sarah!" she shouted in Pennsylvania Dutch, the language of the house. Sarah opened her arms, and the child came running. She lifted her, not straining, with the easy strength of arms used to real weight, and held her against her chest for a moment that was small and whole at once. "Were you waiting for me?" she asked, in Pennsylvania Dutch. "Since 8, the child said very seriously. "It's 8:53 now." "I know. You've been waiting since 8. Sarah laughed. A full laugh this time, not the fragment that had escaped at the restaurant, but the whole thing from somewhere deep, that changes a face for a moment before the face settles back into what it is. "Well then, let's go in," she said, "because you should have been asleep since 8 too." The child didn't protest. She stayed in Sarah's arms up to the porch, then climbed down and ran inside calling for her grandmother. The word she used for Maria, who'd taken on that role with the same quiet willingness she'd learned the recipes with. Sarah stood a moment on the porch. She looked out at the fields opening into the dark beyond the fence. At the stars, which here, without Pittsburgh's light competing, were an entirely different kind. Denser, closer, as if the sky had dropped a little lower. The smell of hay and wood smoke and July earth holding its warmth. The sound of crickets and low wind through the corn. The sound of voices inside. Maria, the child, her brother. Jonas coming in through the back door with the heavy footsteps of someone who'd just finished putting up the horse. She had come home. And as always, when she came home, there was that double, impossible to fully name thing, the peace of being home, and the weight of knowing that somewhere out there was Pittsburgh, was Ardent, was Eli's payphone at the general store and file number 914478MC, and Gulf Arabic and the stars seen from an alley window that smelled of mildew. She belonged to both, and neither fully belonged to her. That was how it was. It would probably always be how it was. And that night, standing on the porch at Kishakokias, with the smell of hay and her niece's voice calling from inside, that felt like enough. More than enough. It felt like exactly what it was. A life built across 2 worlds, fitting fully in neither, and richer for it. She went inside. Sometimes what the world calls simple is only what refuses to be smaller than it is.